From the News Building in London, this is Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Well, good evening, London. Welcome to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Next week's coronation of King Charles will be a global spectacle. Tens of millions will be watching as Charles is crowned in a ceremony steeped in 1,000 years of regal history. But judging by the headlines this week, the monarchy's problems lie not in the past, but the future. A shocking new poll says 78% of Britain's young people don't care about the monarchy. Almost 40% of them would even prefer an elected head of state. And actually, who can blame them for having a dim view of the royal family or the monarchy, given that two of our most famous young royals have waged a 3-year war on the institution? They've weaponised the culture of validation for victimhood and convinced a generation of young people that the monarchy is an antiquated, evil institution. And less than a fortnight before the biggest day in the monarchy's recent history, they're again out in force, making sure the headlines are all about them.
Our next speaker has an unmatched eye for a good photograph. I've experienced his talent firsthand as he has captured many meaningful milestones for me and my family.
There's shy and retiring Meghan, ostensibly introducing her photographer friend at a talk this week, but of course unsubtly debuting a new look that apparently we're told is more Paltrow than Princess. Either way, we haven't seen her since Harry's acidic memoir pumped 416 pages of poison into the royal debate. So why now? Well, I think we can guess. Maybe it's time the royal family sued Harry for invading their privacy, because the damage that these two are doing is becoming very clear. Protesters chanting "Not my king" tried to disrupt a visit by the king and queen to Liverpool today.
Not my king! 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 Not my king!
But, and it's a really good but this, there's some hope. Look at what these school children did, who were there but had other ideas. I love it. That's the future, surely. Now, joining me now is the host of the Big Fish podcast, Spencer Matthews, and Alex O'Connor, who is the host of the Within Reason podcast and is an anti-monarchist, plus writer and commentator Larissa Kennedy. Well, welcome to all of you. So, Spencer, you're related to the royal family. Your brother's married to Pippa Middleton, who's obviously Kate's sister. Let's get out of the way. So you're not a completely impartial observer, but you're a monarchist like me. You believe in the royal family. This poll about young people, what do you make of it?
Well, I suppose that it's a high number of people who are claiming not to care. It's not a high number of people who are claiming they would want something else. What is the number, do you know, of people who would prefer the alternative?
Well, about 40% indicated they may not be opposed to having some form of republic, a president, whatever.
Yeah, which is exactly, the alternative would be to have an elected head of state, that's what you would prefer, is it?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that the poll was shocking and said that some people would even prefer an elected head of state, as if this is some kind of radical idea.
Well, it is for this country.
I don't think it's a surprise that young people in this country are quite mystified by this bizarre relic of our constitution that still relies on the notion that hereditary political office is legitimate. Is a legitimate institution.
So you think they've looked at, for example, the premiership of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss over here, or Donald Trump in America, thought, you know what we need? Get rid of the stable royal family as the head of our country. Let's go for a Boris and a Don. You think people have done that in this country?
Well,
Do
unfortunately...
you think that's what British people actually think about elected officials? In other words, be careful what you wish for. They're not elected, no. They have no real executive power. But what they do provide, in my estimation, they provide us with something unique. When King Charles gets crowned at the coronation in a week and a half's time, the whole world will watch and they will see our country at its best, doing what very few places can do. The pomp, the pageantry, the military procession. And it's something to make us all feel proud. What's wrong with that?
Well, nothing, but don't do it on my dime. I don't see why...
It's not on your dime.
It is. This is being
Why is it on your dime?
This is being funded by the taxpayer.
Tourism pays for it.
tourism, look, if it were true that this ceremony is essentially going to pay for itself, then why is it that the government and the king felt it necessary to say that this would be a service that had value for the taxpayer? Why are the taxpayers even involved at all?
No.
Why can't the royal
family...
But
the taxpayer gets the money
and
back
pay themselves back with the money that we're told...
gets the money back from tourism. That's the point.
Yeah.
So the net cost of the royal family is a positive. They don't cost us anything. So that argument never washes with me because they actually bring more than they cost. So then you're down to, I don't like the fact these people are privileged and live in palaces and so on. But they perform hundreds of duties a year. I mean, you know this better than anyone about the amount of let's bring Spencer back in. You know better than anybody the amount of work they all do, right? I mean, they work hard.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not,
I
can't speak from, for them.
But you're aware of the work they do.
As an observer, they're a very hard-working family that symbolise patriotism, in this country. And, the majority of them have dedicated their entire lives to service, to help Britain. That's all they really try to do.
We're often told that we don't really have a good alternative to monarchy in this country, but I feel like we're already living it. I'm told, on the one hand, when I complain about the illegitimate influence that the monarchy has over the politics of this country, that they don't really have any power at all. They don't really do anything. They cut a few ribbons here and there, except for the legal and tax exemptions that they have, the influence over the Prime Minister. Perhaps this is true.
You're missing the point.
Maybe they really don't have the power, but
you're missing the
same token that somehow, if I therefore suggest that we should get rid of them altogether, they're somehow integral to the upkeep of the political system.
No, they're not.
Royalists seem to want to have their Victoria's
I don't argue that. All that is ceremonial.
These are difficult to reconcile.
All that stuff is ceremonial to me. They don't have any executive power. They don't make the laws that we abide and live by. What they provide, and we saw this clearly in the COVID pandemic when the Queen went on national television and acted like a national comfort blanket, they are there as a constant above all the political fray and turmoil. And when we have the big royal events, there are millions and tens of millions around the world who look at our country in a favourable light. And you cannot calculate, to me, that value just in what you think it costs to put them in palaces and things, because the value, in my view, if you take it in totality, outweighs that. And that's where their value lies to me. Spencer, you do a great podcast. I've been on it. You talk a lot about mental health on that. You talked about all that yourself. Do young people just look at all this stuff through a different lens to people of my age?
Am I young people?
You're sort of in the middle.
I'm 34 years old.
You're nearly middle-aged. So, but what's your general sense about how generations, but I mean, is this a generational thing? Do older people have a different view of the royal family and monarchy to young people, partly because of things like that?
I suppose so. I mean, most of my guests on Big Fish are slightly older, and typically they've had very interesting stories of how they rose to be successful, and lots of that has come through hardship and failure, and it's how they've navigated treacherous and difficult times to become who they've become. I can't really speak to the mental health of the younger generation, but I certainly feel things might be a bit softer nowadays.
That's my asking. Well, yeah, actually, yes.
Yeah.
In a way, I think that is what I'm getting at, really. And I don't want to always bring these royal debates back to Meghan and Harry, but part of my problem with what they did is they weaponised things like racism and mental health, and it caused a lot of damage to the reputation of the royals, not just here but abroad. And I think, just to bring you back in, Alex, there's no doubt in my mind that has contributed to young people, and particularly, I suspect, younger people of colour in this country, who have bought in perhaps by believing what they've been hearing, that the royal family has a group of racists amongst them. And that's not going to make you like an institution. It's going to make you want to get rid of it.
Sure, well, I wouldn't know. There are a few things I find less interesting in this world than the sort of private affairs of Harry and Meghan, or indeed the public affairs of them either. But the problems of the monarchy predate these two individuals. I mean, there are plenty of ways to respond to what you were saying earlier, to engender national spirit and buttress the economy that don't involve subscription to a controversial hereditary dynasty, whose right to rule is still, if I might be allowed to remind you, officially legitimised by the authority of an Anglican God that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, I just can't take this seriously. I understand why they have to...
You're an atheist anti-monarchy.
I understand why they have to keep up with the crowns and the capes, because without these, who are these people? Nothing more than thinly
Well, I might say the same about you. I mean, who are you, an atheist anti-monarchist, to tell me how this country should be run?
Right. I think
Why do you have more
the only
rights?
qualification a person needs to criticise the head of state is citizenry within that state, I'd be quite concerned if you disagreed with that. I think that, look...
With what?
If you thought that you require more of a reason to criticise your head of state than just being supposedly a subject to that head of state. I mean, at the moment somebody claims the right to rule over me by birthright, I think I sort of automatically adopt the right to criticise them too. I'm not the one who requires...
Just to be clear, you'd rather be ruled by Boris Johnson?
I'm not the one who requires...
Would you rather be ruled by Boris Johnson?
I'd rather have an elected head of state, yes.
Yeah, like Boris Johnson or Liz
yes.
Truss?
I'd much rather.
You can see the problem with elected heads of state. They're often complete...
Do you not see stability in the royal family in the sense that they have always been there and kind of, if they do continue, will always be there, whereas politicians kind of come and go.
Yeah.
Yes.
And politicians, are in 1 minute and then somebody does something and all of a sudden they're ousted. And also, it's typically, you'll always have kind of 50% of the country that dislikes any particular kind of head of state, and so aren't the figures just on paper for the royal family better than any politician in history?
Perhaps, but aren't you troubled by the incessant referral to these people as Highness and Majesty? Highness is a relative
Well, I'll
term.
tell you what I'm more offended by.
Highness is a relative
Tell you what I'm
term.
more offended
Higher
by.
than what, Piers?
I'm more
Higher
offended...
than what? And on what grounds?
Let me tell you, I'm more offended by calling Boris Johnson the Right Honourable Gentleman.
We could probably do with getting,
All right.
getting rid of that.
So when
too,
it comes to titles, that gives me more of a problem than calling Charles King. Anyway, got to leave it there. We're going to debate the Right Honourable Boris Johnson in the next segment. Thank you both very much indeed for coming in.